April 18th, 1942, 08:20 hours, 650 nautical miles east of Japan. Lieutenant Colonel James Harold "Jimmy" Doolittle grips the control yoke of his B-25B Mitchell bomber, aircraft number 40 to 2344, positioned on the deck of USS Hornet, CV-8. His bomber, weighing 31,000 pounds fully loaded, sits at the stern of the carrier's flight deck. Ahead of him, 467 feet of wooden deck. Behind him, nothing but open ocean. B-25 Mitchell bombers were never designed to operate from aircraft carriers. They're too heavy. Normal carrier aircraft weigh 10,000, 15,000 pounds. The B-25 weighs 3 times that. They're too large. Wingspan of 7 feet versus 40-50 feet for carrier planes. They require too much takeoff distance, normally 1,500 feet. Hornet's deck is 467 feet from Doolittle's position to the bow. Navy engineers calculated that launching B-25s from carriers was theoretically possible if everything went perfectly. Light wind. B-25 wouldn't have enough airspeed at deck's end. Heavy wind could create dangerous turbulence around the carrier's superstructure. Engine failure. Bomber would crash into ocean immediately. Pilot error. Bomber could stall and cartwheel off the bow. Any mistake means death for the 5-man crew. Doolittle has practiced this launch exactly once, 2 weeks ago at Naval Air Station Norfolk, with his bomber on land. Never from a moving carrier, never in combat conditions. Never knowing he has exactly 47 seconds to get airborne or die. The deck officer, Lieutenant Henry Miller, watches the windsock, gauging carrier speed and wind direction. When conditions are optimal, Miller will give the launch signal. Doolittle will release his brakes. The B-25 will accelerate down Hornet's deck at full throttle, both Wright R-2600 engines screaming at maximum power. If Doolittle reaches 70 mph by the time his nose wheel crosses the bow, he'll have enough airspeed to stay airborne. If he doesn't, his bomber will drop off the bow and impact the ocean at 60 mph, killing his crew instantly. Miller raises his flag. Doolittle advances both throttles to full power. 2,000 horsepower combined thrust fighting against the bomber's brakes. The B-25 shakes, straining forward. Miller drops the flag. Doolittle releases the brakes. Aircraft 40-23-4 begins rolling forward. The Doolittle raid, the most audacious air operation in military history, has begun. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japanese carrier aircraft attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet, sinking or damaging 8 battleships and killing 2,403 Americans. The attack devastates American naval power in the Pacific and gives Japan complete naval superiority for 6 months. But it also creates a strategic problem for Japan. The attack fails to destroy 3 American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, which were at sea during the attack. Those carriers survive and form the core of American striking power. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, understands that American carriers will eventually counterattack. But he believes American morale is so damaged that any counterattack will be cautious, defensive, limited to protecting supply lines. He's wrong. In January 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt meets with his military chiefs and asks a simple question. Can we bomb Japan? The question seems absurd. Japan is 5,000 miles from Hawaii, far beyond the range of any American bomber in 1942. American carriers can launch raids against Japanese-held islands, but Tokyo itself is 800 miles from the nearest point an American carrier could safely approach. Carrier aircraft, fighters and dive bombers have combat radius of 200-300 miles maximum. Tokyo is unreachable by carrier aircraft, but it's not unreachable by land-based bombers. Captain Francis Lowe, a submarine officer on Admiral Ernest King's staff, studies maps of the Pacific and realizes something. Medium bombers like the B-25 Mitchell have range of 100 miles with normal fuel load. If a B-25 could launch from a carrier 650 miles from Japan, it could bomb Tokyo and continue to China, landing at friendly airfields in Chinese territory. The B-25 wouldn't return to the carrier. It couldn't. Carrier landings require arresting hooks, and B-25s aren't equipped. It would be a one-way mission, but it would put American bombs on Tokyo. Low presents the idea to Admiral King. King immediately sees the strategic value. Bombing Tokyo wouldn't significantly damage Japan's war industry, but it would shatter Japanese morale and prove America could strike the home islands. King calls in Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, a famous pre-war test pilot and racing aviator, now commanding officer of aviation development projects. Can B-25s launch from carriers? King asks. Doolittle studies the mathematics, carrier deck length, bomber takeoff speed, wind over deck, weight calculations. Yes, Doolittle says. If we strip them down, reduce weight, add extra fuel tanks, and train crews specifically for short deck takeoffs, it's possible. Then make it happen, King orders. We're bombing Tokyo. The impossible plan. Doolittle begins assembling his force in February 1942. He needs 16 B-25B Mitchell bombers, twins-engine medium bombers, 80 volunteer crewmen, 5 per aircraft, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, gunner, carrier that can transport 16 B-25s to within 650 miles of Japan, training program for impossible short-deck takeoffs, modifications to allow B-25s to carry maximum fuel the bombers, North American Aviation B-25B. Mitchell medium bombers are selected because twin-engine reliability, critical for overwater missions, 300-mile range with standard fuel load, 2,000-pound bomb capacity, proven airframe, already in service with Army Air Forces. Wingspan of 67 feet, barely fits on carrier deck, but standard B-25s weigh too much and lack range for the mission. Doolittle orders extensive modifications. Remove bottom gun turret, saves 600 pounds. Liaison radio set, saves 125 pounds. Heavy equipment and armor, saves 400 pounds. Add collapsible rubber fuel tanks in bomb mold, additional 160 gallons. Replace Nordian bomb site with makeshift site, weight savings plus security. Install wooden fake tail guns, psychological deterrent to Japanese fighters. Result: modified B-25B weighs 31,000 pounds, loaded, carries 1,141 gallons of fuel, has range of 2,400 miles at optimal cruise. The cruise. Doolittle needs volunteers who understand this mission has no guarantee of survival. Even if takeoff succeeds, even if they bomb Tokyo, even if they reach China, they'll be landing at night, low on fuel, in unfamiliar territory. Survival odds are perhaps 50-50. Doolittle addresses the assembled air crews at Eglin Field, Florida. This mission will require takeoff from a carrier deck. Some of you have never seen a carrier. The takeoff distance will be minimum, possibly too minimum. If you successfully launch, you'll fly 650 miles over ocean, bomb Japan, and continue 100 miles to China. Night landing. Unfamiliar airfields. If you crash land in Japan, you'll be captured or killed. If you crash land in the ocean, you'll probably drown. If you reach China, you might be rescued, or you might be captured by Japanese forces occupying Chinese territory. Any questions? Dead silence. Then every hand goes up. Volunteering. Why do you want this mission? Doolittle asks one pilot. Because someone's got to pay them back for Pearl Harbor, sir. Doolittle selects 24 crews, 16 primary, 8 backup, and begins training. The training. February-March 1942. Eglin Field, Florida. Doolittle's crews practice short field takeoffs obsessively. Standard B-25 takeoff procedure: accelerate to 90 mph before lifting nose wheel. Carrier takeoff procedure: accelerate to 70 mph, lift nose wheel immediately, accept marginal airspeed, trust that wing lift will increase as bomber accelerates after leaving deck. It's counterintuitive and dangerous. Pilots are trained to never lift off below safe airspeed, but carriers don't provide safe airspeed. They provide 467 feet of deck and faith. Lieutenant Travis Hoover practices 40 short field takeoffs in 2 weeks. It feels like you're going to stall and crash every single time, Hoover recalls. You reach the end of the runway, your airspeed is 15 mph below normal takeoff speed, and your instinct screams, "Don't pull back." But you pull back anyway, and somehow the plane stays in the air. By March 1942, all 16 primary crews can consistently take off in under 500 feet. Good enough, maybe. The carrier, USS Hornet CV-8, newly commissioned aircraft carrier, is assigned to transport the B-25s. On April 2, 1942, 16 modified B-25s are loaded aboard Hornet at Naval Air Station Alameda, California. The bombers barely fit. Each B-25's wingtips extend beyond the carrier's deck edge. The bombers are positioned stern to bow, tightly packed, with minimal space between aircraft. Hornet's normal complement of fighters and dive bombers are left behind. There's no room for them with 16 B-25s aboard. On April 2nd, Hornet departs San Francisco, heading west toward Japan. The mission is so secret that even Hornet's captain doesn't know the target until the carrier is at sea. On April 8th, Hornet rendezvous with Task Force 16, including carrier Enterprise, cruisers, and destroyers, under command of Admiral William Halsey. The combined task force proceeds toward Japan at maximum speed. The plan? Launch B-25s on April 19th from 450 miles offshore, bomb Tokyo and other cities, continue to China. But the plan changes. Launch from Hornet April 18th, 1942. So 7:38 hours. Hornet's radar detects a small vessel 20 miles ahead, a Japanese picket boat monitoring approaches to Japan. The vessel is too close. If it reports the American task force, Japanese carriers will launch counterattack before Doolittle's bombers can launch. Halsey orders cruiser USS Nashville to sink the picket boat immediately. Nashville opens fire with 6-inch guns. The picket boat is destroyed in minutes, but not before sending a radio message. 3 enemy carriers spotted, bearing 276 degrees. Halsey knows Japanese carriers are now being scrambled to intercept his task force. If he waits until the planned launch point, 450 miles from Japan, Japanese aircraft might attack Hornet before the B-25s can launch. Halsey makes the decision: launch immediately. Current position, 650 miles from Tokyo, 200 miles farther than planned. This means Doolittle's bombers will have barely enough fuel to reach China, and only if everything goes perfectly. At 0800 hours, Doolittle receives the launch order. He addresses his crews on Hornet's deck. We're launching now. We're 200 miles farther out than planned. That means we're at maximum range, maybe beyond maximum range. Some of you might not make it to China. If you run out of fuel, ditch in the ocean or bail out over Chinese territory. Avoid capture if possible. If captured, tell them nothing. Questions? Bombardier Jacob de Chazer raises his hand. What if we don't have enough fuel to reach China? Then you'll ditch in the ocean and hope for rescue, Doolittle says bluntly. Or you'll crash land in Japanese-held territory and spend the war as a POW, but you're going anyway, because Tokyo is getting bombed today. Any other questions? No one speaks. Good. Board your aircraft. We launch in 20 minutes. Would you volunteer for a mission where success means barely surviving and failure means death or capture? Tell me in the comments. At 0820 hours, Doolittle's B-25 is positioned at shore. Hornet's stern, engine started, ready to launch. Behind him, 15 more B-25s, lined up nose to tail, all engines running. Hornet turns into the wind, creating maximum headwind over deck to increase bomber airspeed. The carrier pitches in moderate seas, bow rising and falling 15 to 20 feet with each wave. Deck Officer Miller watches the carrier's pitch, timing the launch for when the bow begins rising, giving bombers slight upward trajectory as they leave the deck. Miller raises his flag. Doolittle advances throttles to full power. Miller drops his flag. Doolittle releases brakes. The B-25 accelerates down the deck. Doolittle's co-pilot, Lieutenant Richard Cole, calls out airspeed. 30 knots, 40, 50. The white line marking deck center line blurs beneath the bomber. 60 knots, 65. The bow approaches. 100 feet, 50 feet. 70 knots. Doolittle pulls back on the yoke. The B-25's nose wheel lifts. The main wheels leave the deck. For one terrifying second, the bomber hangs suspended, airborne, but below stall speed. Then the bomber accelerates. The propellers bite air, wings generate lift, and aircraft 40-23-4 climbs away from Hornet. Doolittle has successfully launched a B-25 from a carrier deck. Now he just has to fly 650 miles to Tokyo, bomb the city, and fly another 100 miles to China, on near-empty tanks, with no guarantee anyone on the ground will help him. Behind Doolittle, the remaining 15 B-25s launch in sequence. Every 3-5 minutes, another bomber rolls down Hornet's deck and fights into the air. Some launches are smooth. Pilots lift off with 20 feet of deck to spare. One launch is terrifying. Lieutenant Edgar McElroy's bomber drops off the bow, falling toward the ocean before the pilot pulls it into a climb at the last second. By 09:20 hours, exactly 1 hour after Doolittle's launch, all 16 B-25s are airborne, formed into loose groups, heading west toward Japan at 5,000 feet. USS Hornet and Task Force 16 immediately turn east, withdrawing at maximum speed to avoid Japanese counterattack. The B-25s are on their own. Over Tokyo, 12:15 hours, April 18th, 50 miles east of Tokyo, Doolittle's B-25 crosses the Japanese coastline at 100 feet altitude. The approach is intentionally low, below radar coverage, difficult for fighters to intercept. But low altitude means Japanese observers can see and hear the bombers clearly. Doolittle expected to encounter Japanese fighters immediately. Instead, he sees civilians on the ground waving. They think the B-25s are Japanese bombers returning from training. The rising sun insignia on Japanese aircraft looks similar enough to American star insignia that casual observers mistake them at a distance. This confusion gives Doolittle's bombers precious minutes of uncontested approach. By the time Japanese air defenses realize these are enemy aircraft, the B-25s are over their targets. Doolittle's target: industrial area in northern Tokyo, factories producing aircraft components and ammunition. At 12:30 hours, Bombardier Sergeant Fred Bramer calls, "Target ahead, bomb bay doors open." Doolittle steadies the bomber at 100 feet, 230 mph indicated airspeed. Bombs away. 400-pound incendiary bombs fall from Doolittle's B-25. The bombs, each containing 128 M50 incendiary submunitions, are designed to start fires rather than destroy structures with blast. The bombs impact a factory complex, detonating and scattering incendiaries across several buildings. Fires ignite immediately. Doolittle doesn't wait to observe results. He's already banking away, heading west toward China at full throttle. Behind him, the remaining 15 B-25s attack targets across Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. Some bombers encounter anti-aircraft fire, black puffs of flak bursting around them. Some bombers are pursued by Japanese fighters, A-6M-0s scrambled from nearby airfields. But the attacks happen so quickly, each bomber is over target for less than 90 seconds, that Japanese defenses can't effectively engage. Lieutenant Travis Hoover's bomber attacks an oil tank farm in Yokohama. His bombardier achieves direct hit. The oil tanks erupt in flames that will burn for 3 days. Lieutenant Robert Gray's bomber attacks a steel mill in Tokyo. His incendiaries start fires in the plant's wooden outbuildings, spreading to the main facility. Lieutenant William Farrow's bomber attacks military installations in Nagoya. His bombs destroy a barracks complex and damage a munitions depot. Not every attack succeeds perfectly. Some bombs miss their targets, falling in residential areas, killing Japanese civilians. Some incendiaries fail to ignite. But overall, the raid achieves its objective. American bombs are falling on Japan. For the first time since the war began, Japanese citizens experience what war feels like when it comes to your home. By 1300 hours, all 16 B-25s have departed Japanese airspace, heading west over the Sea of Japan toward China. Japanese fighter patrols search frantically for the bombers, but can't locate them. The B-25s are flying at wave-top height, below radar coverage. Behind the bombers, Tokyo burns. Not catastrophically, the damage is relatively light compared to later firebombing raids. But psychologically, the impact is devastating. Japan's military had promised citizens they were safe from enemy attack. The government had assured people that American forces were defeated and demoralized. Now, American bombers had penetrated Japanese air defenses, bombed the capital, and escaped. If this could happen once, it could happen again. The long flight to nowhere, 1400 hours. Over the Sea of Japan, Doolittle's B-25 flies west at 5,000 feet. Both engines running smoothly, fuel gauges showing 60% remaining. He has 1,100 miles to go to reach Chinese airfields. His fuel will last approximately 6 hours at optimal cruise speed and altitude. The flight to China will take at least 7 hours. The mathematics don't work. Doolittle knows, has always known, that reaching China requires everything to go perfectly. Perfect cruise speed, not too fast, wasting fuel, not too slow, wasting time. Perfect altitude, 10,000 feet is optimal for fuel efficiency, but requires oxygen. Perfect winds, tailwinds help, headwinds kill. Perfect navigation, every mile flown in wrong direction wastes fuel. And even with everything perfect, fuel will be marginal. At 1,600 hours, the Chinese coast appears ahead. 350 miles flown, 850 miles remaining. Fuel gauges, 45% remaining. The math still doesn't work. At 1,800 hours, Doolittle crosses into Chinese airspace. Fuel gauges, 25% remaining. Distance to nearest friendly airfield, 400 miles. Fuel required to reach airfield, 30%. Doolittle makes the decision he won't reach the airfield. Best case scenario, he'll make it within 50 miles of the airfield before fuel runs out. Then he'll either crash land or order his crew to bail out. At 2,000 hours, after 11 hours of flight time, Doolittle's fuel gauges read empty. He's over mountainous Chinese terrain, visibility deteriorating in rain and fog, no landmarks visible. His navigator estimates they're 60 miles southeast of Chuchao Airfield, but can't confirm position due to weather. Doolittle calls his crew, "We're out of fuel and out of options. We're going to bail out. On my signal, go out to the bomb bay hatch. Pull your ripcord at 5,000 feet. Try to avoid mountains. Questions?" "What about the plane?" co-pilot Cole asks. "The plane is going to crash. We're not. Ready?" "Ready." At 20-30 hours, at 8,000 feet altitude over Chinese mountains, Doolittle's crew bails out. Bombardier Bramer goes first, falling into darkness and rain. Navigator Lieutenant Henry Potter follows. Gunner Sergeant Paul Leonard jumps third. Co-pilot Cole exits fourth. Doolittle goes last. As aircraft commander, he ensures all crew are out before abandoning the aircraft. He climbs out of the pilot seat, sets the autopilot for level flight, and walks to the bomb bay hatch. Below, darkness, rain, mountains somewhere in the black. Doolittle jumps. His parachute deploys at 5,000 feet. Above him, his B-25, aircraft 40-2344, the first bomber ever launched from a carrier deck, flies on autopilot for another 2 minutes before running completely dry and crashing into Chinese mountains. Doolittle lands in a rice paddy, unhurt. He has no idea where he is, whether his crew survived, or whether he's in friendly or enemy territory. But he successfully bombed Tokyo. Mission accomplished. Aftermath and survival of the 16 B-25s launched from Hornet. 15 crash-landed or were abandoned over China. 1 landed in Soviet territory near Vladivostok. The crew was interned, but survived. Of the 80 crewmen, 69 survived, and were rescued by Chinese civilians or nationalist forces. 8 were captured by Japanese forces in Japanese-occupied China. 3 were killed. 2, drowning after ditching an ocean, 1 shot by Japanese captors. The 8 captured crewmen faced brutal treatment. Japanese military interrogators tortured them for information about American carrier locations and future raid plans. In October 1942, a Japanese military tribunal sentenced all 8 to death for crimes against humanity, claiming the bombers had intentionally targeted civilians. Emperor Hirohito commuted 5 sentences to life imprisonment. 3 were executed by firing squad: Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, Lieutenant William Farrow, and Sergeant Harold Spatz. The 5 imprisoned airmen suffered in Japanese POW camps until war's end, surviving on starvation rations, forced labor, and disease. 1, Lieutenant Robert Meter, died in captivity from malnutrition and dysentery in December 1943. The remaining 4, Captain Robert Height, Lieutenant Chase Nielsen, Lieutenant George Barr, and Corporal Jacob DeShazer, survived until liberation in August 1945. Doolittle's crew survived and was rescued by Chinese nationalist forces within 48 hours of bailing out. Chinese civilians had heard aircraft flying overhead, found parachutes in fields, and searched for survivors. They risked their own lives. Japanese forces executed thousands of Chinese civilians suspected of helping Doolittle's crews. An estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians were killed in Japanese reprisal operations following the raid. Entire villages were destroyed because villagers helped American airmen. The cost of the raid, in Chinese lives, far exceeded any military damage inflicted on Japan. Doolittle didn't learn about Chinese casualties until after the war. "I felt, and still feel, responsible," Doolittle said in a 1989 interview. "We asked for Chinese help, they gave it. And 250,000 of them died because they helped us. That weighs on me, it always will." The strategic impact. The Doolittle raid caused minimal physical damage to Japan. 16 bombers dropping 64 bombs destroyed or damaged approximately 50 buildings and killed an estimated 50 Japanese civilians. Compare this to later B-29 firebombing raids in 1945, which killed tens of thousands per raid. From a purely military perspective, the raid was insignificant, but from a psychological and strategic perspective, the raid was transformative. Impact on American morale. In April 1942, America had suffered 4 months of uninterrupted defeats. Pearl Harbor destroyed the Pacific Fleet. Philippines fell to Japanese invasion. Wake Island captured. Singapore lost. Java Sea defeat. American morale was at its lowest point of the war. News of the Doolittle raid electrified America. Newspaper headlines. Tokyo bombed, Doolittle does it. Radio broadcasts interrupted regular programming to announce the raid. President Roosevelt held a press conference and quipped that the bombers had launched from Shangri-La, refusing to reveal the carrier launch to protect operational security. Suddenly, America was hitting back. The psychological boost was immeasurable. Impact on Japanese strategy. The raid shattered Japanese confidence in their air defenses. If 16 American bombers could reach Tokyo, what would stop 100 bombers, or 1,000? Emperor Hirohito demanded to know how American bombers had penetrated Japanese defenses undetected. Japanese military leadership realized they'd failed to adequately protect the home islands. This directly influenced the decision to attack Midway Island in June 1942. Admiral Yamamoto argued that destroying American carriers was essential to prevent future raids on Japan. The Midway operation, intended to draw out and destroy American carriers, resulted in catastrophic Japanese defeat, losing 4 fleet carriers and shifting the Pacific War's momentum permanently. In this sense, the Doolittle raid contributed to Japan's defeat at Midway. Impact on Doolittle. Doolittle believed the raid was a failure. He'd lost all 16 bombers, didn't bring a single aircraft back. He'd crashed his own plane into Chinese mountains. He believed he'd be court-martialed for losing 16 expensive bombers and achieving minimal damage. "I felt I'd failed," Doolittle recalled. "We didn't destroy any major targets. We lost every airplane. Some of my men were captured or killed. I expected to be relieved of command." Instead, Doolittle was promoted 2 ranks, from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general, skipping the rank of colonel entirely. He received the Medal of Honor from President Roosevelt. The citation read, "For conspicuous leadership above and beyond the call of duty, involving personal valor and intrepidity at an extreme hazard to life." Doolittle went on to command the 8th Air Force in Europe, leading the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. He retired as a lieutenant general in 1946. The Raiders' reunions. After the war, the surviving Doolittle Raiders, 69 men, held annual reunions from 1946 to 2013. They met every April 18th, the anniversary of the raid. At each reunion, they performed a ritual. The Raiders maintained a collection of silver goblets, 80 goblets total, 1 for each crew member. Each goblet was engraved with the crew member's name, upright for living Raiders, inverted for deceased Raiders. At each reunion, the surviving Raiders would toast their fallen comrades using a bottle of cognac from 1896, Doolittle's birth year. The cognac bottle was kept locked in a special case at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. As Raiders died over the decades, their goblets were inverted. By 2013, only 4 Raiders remained alive: Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cole, Doolittle's co-pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Height, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Saylor, and Staff Sergeant David Thatcher. On April 18, 2013, the 4 final raiders held their last reunion at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. They inverted the goblets of raiders who died since the previous year. Then they opened the 1896 cognac bottle and toasted their fallen comrades one final time. "To those who flew," Cole said, raising his glass. "And to those who didn't make it home," Haiti added. They drank. Then they sealed the remaining cognac in its case, ending the tradition as fewer than 4 raiders couldn't perform the ceremony. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cole, the last surviving Doolittle raider, died on April 9, 20, at age 103. With his death, the last man who launched a B-25 from USS Hornet on April 18, 1942 was gone. Legacy in aviation history. The Doolittle raid proved that aircraft carriers could project power far beyond their defensive perimeter. Before the raid, carriers were viewed as defensive weapons, protecting ships from aircraft, launching patrols, providing reconnaissance. The raid demonstrated carriers could launch offensive strikes deep into enemy territory. This concept became fundamental to Pacific War strategy. Carrier task forces would approach enemy positions, launch massive airstrikes, and withdraw before enemy response. The battles of Coral Sea, Midway, Philippine Sea, and Leyte Gulf all employed this doctrine. Modern carrier operations, launching FA-18s or F-35s hundreds of miles from the carrier, descend directly from Doolittle's raid. The raid also validated a principle: impossible missions become possible when courage meets engineering. Navy engineers said B-25s couldn't launch from carriers. Doolittle proved they could, with modifications, training, and willingness to accept risk. That mindset, "let's figure out how to do the impossible," became characteristic of American military innovation throughout the war. In war, should leaders attempt impossible missions that boost morale, even if they risk lives for minimal military gain? I'd love to hear your perspective. April 18, 1942. 16 bombers, 80 men, 650 miles of ocean, 467 feet of carrier deck. Everything about the mission was impossible. Launch bombers from carriers, impossible. Bomb Tokyo and escape, impossible. Fly 1,150 miles on fuel for 1 ton, impossible. But they did it anyway. Not because the raid would win the war, it wouldn't. Not because the damage justified the risk, it didn't. But because after 4 months of defeat, America needed to prove one thing: we're still in this fight, and we're coming for you. 3 years later, B-29 superfortresses would burn Japanese cities with incendiary raids that made the Doolittle raid look insignificant. But none of those raids mattered as much as the first one. The raid that launched from an impossible place and changed everything. These stories of courage, innovation, and impossible missions deserve to be remembered. Subscribe so they never fade into history. Next time, the tank duel that lasted 11 hours and the day American armor learned to fight tigers.